Have you ever experienced synergy in your life? Do you even know what the word synergy means? Today, that's what we're going to talk about. If you don't know, I am a comic book nerd. When I was a kid, I used to collect comic books and I loved all the superhero stories. And you can imagine my excitement when Disney and Marvel started making those superhero movies. And movies about Iron Man and Thor and the Incredible Hulk and Spider-Man. And I just loved when those movies came out. Over the last couple of weeks, my daughter and I have been watching each of those Marvel movies in successive order until we got to the last one last night. And as you watch through those movies, there's individual movies such as Iron Man, who fights by himself against the bad guy, and Thor has his own standalone movie, and each of the characters has their each standalone movie. And then in the middle of all these movies, there are movies when all of the heroes come together. It's called the Avengers. And what they discover in these movies is that there is a threat that is too difficult for just one of the superheroes to tackle by themselves. And what they discover is that they all need to come together in order to overcome this threat. And each of those superheroes, they each have their own unique abilities. They have their own unique skills. And as you watch the Avenger movies, they fight side by side with each other. They each have their own place. They each have their own specific job. And in the end, because they're able to come together, they're able to defeat the enemy. And what they experience there is synergy. The word synergy that we use in English comes from a compound Greek word, comes exactly from the Greek, which means energy working together. And maybe you've experienced synergy in your life, and if you've not ever experienced that in your life, I'm sure that you understand that synergy is important. It's important in the workplace. It's important for superheroes. It's important for sports teams, but even beyond that, synergy is important in our marriages. It's important in our families. And synergy is important even in the life of a church and a ministry. And so I want to share with you something today. The bottom line today is maybe not new to you, but it's this, that teamwork makes the dream work. Teamwork makes the dream work. It's important in every area of our life. And you know that it's important because maybe you have been in a spot in your life where you've encountered a task that was just monumental. It seemed as if it was impossible. And what happens when you and I encounter these situations in our life and when we try to go at it on our own? And some things happen. Sometimes we quit and we never try again. Sometimes we get burned out when we try to do these things on our own. I know of people who encounter these difficult situations in their life and they try to do it all on their own, and it leads to cynicism and they begin to harbor resentments and grudges towards others. Teamwork makes the dream work. It's important in our life because teamwork, when we work together as a team, when we experience this synergy, there's no task that's impossible. When we work together as a team, there's no accomplishment that is beyond our grasp. There is no dream that cannot be attained. There's no goal that cannot be reached. Teamwork makes the dream work. Lyndon Johnson, former president of the United States, said this. He says, "There are no problems that we cannot solve together, and there's very few that we can solve alone." And that, like I said, that's true in every area of our lives. That together there's usually no problems that we can solve, that we can't solve. But alone, there's only a few that we probably have the potential to solve. And what I want to show you this morning from the life of Nehemiah as we continue our series entitled Rebuild. So we look into 2021 and understand that there's things that we're going to have to rebuild individually. There's things that we're going to have to rebuild corporately. And as we look at the life of Nehemiah today and talk about this idea that teamwork makes the dream work, I want you to see that the one is a number that's too small to achieve anything that is great. Anything that we're going to achieve that's going to have significance, anything that's going to have eternal value, it's going to take synergy. It's going to take teamwork to make the dream work. Now, just by way of review, we started this series a few weeks ago in Nehemiah chapter 1. Nehemiah is there in the city of Susa. He was the cupbearer to the king. And the people have gone back to Israel, and they have been allowed to go back after they were taken into captivity. And as people started coming back, Nehemiah asked a question. He wanted to know how things were going in Jerusalem, and he heard the bad news about how the people were in great trouble and they were a reproach, and the walls were torn down and the gates were burned with fire. And there we read in Nehemiah chapter 1 that Nehemiah just began to weep, and we learned that the things that break God's heart should break our hearts. The things that concern God should concern us. And so what Nehemiah does there is he just starts praying. And we read from Nehemiah chapter 1 and Nehemiah chapter 2 that he probably spent 4 to 5 months just praying and planning. And we learn that we are to pray and plan knowing that God can. Nehemiah expected God to work out the how to the what that he had given to him. The what was he knew that he had to go back and rebuild the city walls, but he wasn't sure how he was going to get out of the service of the king. He wasn't sure how the materials would all come together. But what Nehemiah did for about 5 months is he prayed and planned, and he expected that God was going to answer the how to the what. And so finally, the king allows Nehemiah to return back to Jerusalem, and Nehemiah gathers all the things he's going to need to overcome the obstacles that he anticipates and the materials that he's going to need, and he sets out for Jerusalem. Now, Nehemiah at the time was living in Susa, and the journey from Susa to Jerusalem was 1,000 miles, and this probably took him another 4 to 5 months. I want you to think about that. From the moment that Nehemiah first heard about how devastated the city of Jerusalem was until Nehemiah actually arrives on the scene, it's somewhere between 9 months to a year. And so I just want you to think with me for a minute as Nehemiah starts to head towards Jerusalem and as he sees the city on the horizon. And this is probably the first time Nehemiah has ever seen the city and all the emotions that must have welled up in Nehemiah's life, because the city had been on his heart for a long time, but now he was actually where his heart had been for a number of months. And what Nehemiah is going to learn, and what you and I should glean from Nehemiah here, is that teamwork makes the dream work. And so as Nehemiah comes back to Jerusalem, and we're going to pick it up here in chapter 2, verse 11, the first thing that we see here is Nehemiah knew that teamwork makes the dream work, is that Nehemiah surveyed the problem. If you look in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 11, it says this: I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few men. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. So here Nehemiah finally arrives in the city. He says, I just spent 3 days just probably getting his bearings straight again and recovering from the jet lag from 1,000-mile, several-month journey that he had made. And he tells no one why he's there. I can imagine that there are people in Jerusalem and they're wondering, hey, what's this guy doing? This guy came from Susa, and what's he doing here? He had told no one about what God had put on his heart. Now, Nehemiah is so much different to me. Anytime I have a good idea, I want to let everyone know right away. And so when I read that, I wonder, why didn't Nehemiah tell anyone? Maybe Nehemiah was waiting until he saw the extent of the problem before he gave the vision to them. Maybe he just didn't know anybody in the city. Maybe he wanted to keep it quiet because he knew that what he was about ready to do, for a lot of people, would seem impossible. And maybe he just didn't want to hear people telling him that this can't be done. Maybe Nehemiah just simply wanted to see how bad it really was. I mean, all he had to this point was what people had told him, and maybe he just wanted to see it for himself. I don't know what the reason was, but he didn't tell anyone. And so one night he takes a few guys with him. He's riding a horse or a donkey, but he's the only one that has one. In verse 13, by night I went out through the valley gate toward the jackal well and dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. Then I moved on toward the fountain gate and the king's pool, but there was not enough room for my mount to get through. So I went up by the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally, I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had said nothing to the Jews or the priests or nobles or officials or any others who would be doing the work. Now, twice in those verses, Nehemiah says he went and he examined. The word that Nehemiah wrote in his language was a word that was literally translated in a medical community. It meant what a doctor would do to inspect a wound or an injury. And what the doctor is doing there is he's examining it to really gauge the depth of the injury and how bad it really is. And that's the same word that Nehemiah employs here. And he goes out and he's examining, he's inspecting, he's looking to see how terrible the damage really is. And as Nehemiah is doing this, I put myself in his sandals, and Nehemiah's going out. And keep in mind, these walls had been torn down. The gates were burned by fire. It had been like this for 150 years. Just piles of rubble laying all over the place. Weeds and vines are probably growing up. And Nehemiah goes and he gets to a spot that's so bad that he can't even ride his animal across. He had to get off. And I just imagine, as I put myself in Nehemiah's shoes, as he looks at this, he had to be thinking, this is worse than I thought it was. This is worse than they had described to me. Maybe Nehemiah is thinking, what have I got myself into? Maybe Nehemiah is starting to ponder, did I make the right decision? Maybe I just need to go back to Susa and forget about all of this. But that's not what Nehemiah does. Maybe you this year, there's something that God is asking you to rebuild in your life. And as you look at the situation, as you survey the problem, as you survey this rebuilding project, maybe for you it seems insurmountable. Here at Hillside, our purpose statement is we want to help as many people as possible to become committed followers of Jesus Christ. In 2021, I really want to rebuild on that purpose statement. The whole reason we're here is to help as many people as possible to become committed followers of Jesus Christ. As we look across the landscape of our community and our country and all around the world, we could almost get discouraged saying the problem is too great. But what Nehemiah learns here in just a minute, what I want you to understand today is no matter how big the problem is, teamwork makes the dream work. When Nehemiah returns from surveying and examining the damage of the walls and the gates, look at what Nehemiah says in verse 17. He says, "Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in Jerusalem. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire." Nehemiah uses two interesting words there. He says, look at the trouble we are in. That word that he uses for trouble means to be distressed for, to be miserable. But it's an interesting word because when that word is used in comparison to something else, it's translated worse. And what Nehemiah is saying is he's saying, hey, the situation we are in is the worst possible situation we could be in. The trouble is so bad, Nehemiah is saying, I can't imagine it being any worse than it is now. And then he says, Jerusalem lies in ruins. It means to be desolate. And this is something that seems to be insurmountable, but look at what Nehemiah says after he realizes how bad the situation is. At the end of verse 17, he says, "Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God upon me and what the king had said to me." So Nehemiah surveyed the problem, and after he sees how bad it is, Nehemiah understands that teamwork makes the dream work. So his next step is that he summons the people. Nehemiah summoned the people. After he tells them how bad it is, he says, however, he says it's the worst possible condition it can be. However, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. You see, Nehemiah knew that he needed the help of others. And their response when Nehemiah had told them this, at the end of verse 18, they replied, "Let us start rebuilding." So they began this good work. I circled 3 different words in these couple verses: us, we, and us. Now, in stark contrast, if you look back in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 5, when Nehemiah is talking to the king, Nehemiah says, "Allow me to go back so that I can rebuild the wall." And now we come here to the end of chapter 2, and it's us and we. Now, I don't want to read too much into it. Maybe Nehemiah understood from the outset that he was going to need help from others, and maybe he's just telling the king, "Hey, I'm going to lead this project." But there's a lot of people that I know who are facing a lot of difficult situations in their life, a lot of big rebuilding projects, and they're trying to do it by themselves. And maybe you are a person who doesn't like to ask for the help of other people. Here, Nehemiah understood that he couldn't do it by himself, and the people responded in such a way that they knew he shouldn't do it by himself. And they wouldn't let him do it by themselves. And so they said, "Let us start rebuilding." Jenny Thompson is the most decorated Olympic woman athlete in the history of the Olympics. Prior to Michael Phelps surpassing her a few years ago, at one point she had the most medals of any Olympian in history. She had 8 gold medals. She has earned 3 silver medals and 1 bronze medal, 12 medals in all. Between 1992 and 2004, in those 4 Olympic Games, she had won all of those medals. Now, when I say the name Jenny Thompson, it may not be a name that you're familiar with, but Jenny Thompson, the most decorated athlete in women's athlete in Olympic history, is also in the Olympic Hall of Fame. And the reason why you probably don't know Jenny Thompson's name is because all but 2 of her medals were won on relay teams. She was on a swimming team with 3 other swimmers, and only 2 of her medals, and none of them gold, did she win in an individual event. And so when Jenny Thompson was inducted into the Olympic Hall of Fame, there were people who said, well, maybe she shouldn't be inducted with all the other great athletes in the history of the Olympics. And yeah, she's won all these gold medals, but she's not won them in individual events. When Jenny Thompson was asked about that, she said this. She said, "Gold medals are gold medals, and I have 8 of them." And then she said this. She said, I know I could not have won these gold medals on my own, but I needed my team, and my team needed me. In the same way, Nehemiah understood that he couldn't solve this problem on his own. I understand that the vision and the purpose that God has given to us as a church, that I cannot do that on my own. And whatever your rebuilding project is this year in your life, you cannot do it on your own. Teamwork makes the dream work. So after Nehemiah surveyed the problem, after he summoned the people, the next thing Nehemiah does here is he synchronized the production. If you jump down to chapter 3, I'm not going to read the entirety of chapter 3. If you just skim through it, you'll understand why, because I didn't stretch before I filmed this, and so there's some names in here that I might pull a muscle if I try to say them. But I just want to read the first couple verses. It says this in chapter 3, verse 1. Eliashib, the high priest, and his fellow priests went to work and rebuilt the sheep gate. They dedicated it and set its doors in place, building as far as the Tower of the 100, which they dedicated, and as far as the Tower of Haniel. The men of Jericho built the adjoining section, and Zachar, son of Imri, built next to him. The fish gate was rebuilt by the sons of Hasaniah. They laid its beams and put its doors and bolts and bars in place. Meremoth, the son of Uriah, the son of Hakkoz, repaired the next section. Next to him, Meshullam, son of Berechiah, the son of Meshezabel, made repairs. And next to him, Zadok, the son of Banah, also made repairs. The next section was repaired by the men of Tekoa, but their nobles would not put their shoulders to the work under their supervisors. In this chapter, Nehemiah names 38 specific people, and I read some of them there. There are 42 different groups, such as the men of Tekoa and the Levites and goldsmiths. There's others that Nehemiah doesn't name, and they're just anonymous. But what you see from what I just read, each of them had a specific place and a specific job. Nehemiah lined them up one next to the other, next to the other, next to the other, and he synchronized their work. And what we discover here is that every single person that worked on the wall was important. And what they begin to experience in their lives as together they rebuild the wall is they experience synergy. Energy that is working together. And this synergy was so great that in Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 15, Nehemiah records there that they completed the entirety of the wall. They had it built to its entire height. There were no breaches in the wall. There were no holes in the wall. It was all completely put together in 52 days. In less than 2 months. Because they worked together, they were able to rebuild these walls. Because Nehemiah understood, the people understood, and what I want you to understand today is that teamwork makes the dream work. Teamwork makes the dream work. God has not called any of us to do the work alone. That we need each other. If you read in Corinthians, he talks about how every member of the body is important. The eye is just as important as the ear, and the ear is just as important as the nose. And every part is important. And teamwork makes the dream work. What we say here at Hillside is we want people to connect, grow, serve, go. We believe that those are kind of the steps to become a committed follower of Jesus Christ. And what I know is that I cannot do this by myself. The leadership cannot do it by themselves. We need everyone because teamwork makes the dream work. We want people to connect here at the church. And so one of the things that you can do is you can invite people to come to church with you. If you're here in church, you can see somebody, maybe you haven't recognized them before, and go out of your way and introduce yourself and begin to build a relationship with them because teamwork makes the dream work. And you might be able to make a friendship and be able to be involved in this person's life and help them to grow to become a committed follower of Jesus Christ. Connect. The next step is to grow. We want people to grow in their relationships with one another through the context of small groups. Maybe you've not been involved in a small group. We encourage people to be in small groups because all of us are going to experience these big situations in our life. We call them transformational events. And it's going to be good to have people in your life who can walk with you because teamwork makes the dream work. Or maybe you will have the opportunity because of something that you've happened in your life where you can walk with someone else. So we're looking this year to grow our small group ministry and have more locations. And maybe you would like to host a group, or maybe God has equipped you to lead a group. It's really not difficult to lead a group. We write all the small group questions every week. They're based on the message of the week. And if you just show up or watch online, you're prepared for small group every week. So we want people to connect, grow, serve. We want people to serve in the church, but more importantly, we want you to serve outside the church. Serve in the Hope Center here in Bellwood. Serve in a place that is needing manpower in your location, wherever it is. One of the things we want you to do is to discover your shape, your spiritual gifts, your heart, your ability, your personalities, your experiences, because God has shaped each of us uniquely to serve in unique ways. And so get in where you fit in, because teamwork makes the dream work. And then finally, go. Take the gospel to your places of influence. We call them your friends, your relatives, your associates, your neighbors, understanding that God has placed you in these people's lives for an important purpose. And that purpose is to share with them the goodness and the greatness of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so we ask you just to simply intercede, to pray for these people. Invest in their lives, do something to serve them in a practical way with the intention to invite them to come to church with you, invite them to watch a video, invite them to read Christian literature, invite them to read something in the Bible with you. But intercede, invest, and invite. And it takes all of us to do this. There's a lot of rebuilding that we're going to have to do spiritually in 2021, and teamwork makes the dream work, and you can help today. And so as we close here, I would just want to ask you this question. What is your next step? I mean, where are you in the process of becoming a committed follower of Christ? What is the next step for you? For some of you, it might be taking that step of becoming a member of the church. For some of you, that next step might be to follow the Lord in baptism and take your faith public to the people around you and be baptized. Maybe some of you need to be involved in a small group. Maybe some of you need to step out in faith and serve in some way and allow God to stretch you. Some of you have not been really active in sharing your faith with your friends, and maybe that's the next step for you. Maybe the next step for you is to get involved in a D group. It's a discipleship group. If you would like more information about that, come and see me or send me an email. But what is your next step? Because it takes all of us. Teamwork makes the dream work. None of us in the body are more important than the other. We all need each other working together to accomplish the purpose and rebuild the things that God has asked us to. This truth really hit home with me for the first time in Super Bowl 37. It was in 2003. I had just started pastoring a church at the time, and I was watching the Super Bowl, and it was between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Los Angeles Raiders, who are now the Las Vegas Raiders. But I was watching that game. Tampa Bay ended up winning 48-21. But the thing that stuck out to me is I was after the game, and they were celebrating, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were celebrating, and all the players were lined up, and they took the camera and they panned down across all the players. And what I noticed, there were players that were standing there, they were sweating, some of them were bleeding, some of them had grass stains on their shirt, and then you'd look a little bit further down the line, and there'd be a guy there, wasn't sweating, his hair looked like he'd just got done blow drying it, and his uniform was spotless, there wasn't a wrinkle on it. And this is what struck me that day, was that everybody on that team were winners. They had just won the championship. They were all part of the team, and they had all won. However, there was only a percentage of them that actually played in the game. And this is what stuck out to me in the context of the local church, is that if you're part of the church, we're all going to win. We know that we are on the winning team. But how disappointing it is to be on the winning team but never have gotten into the game. So I want to encourage you today to get off the bench and get in the game, because teamwork makes the dream work. There's some things that I'm hoping that we're going to do in 2021, some things that God has laid on my heart, and we're going to need your help to accomplish them. Because teamwork makes the dream work. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you that you have brought all of us together for a purpose, and all of us are important to accomplish the purpose that you have given to us. And so I pray that you would use us as we work together to help as many people as possible to become committed followers of Christ. That we would get off the bench, get in the game, and remember that teamwork makes the dream work. So use us for your purposes. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thanks for joining me today. Can't wait to see you next week.